Welcome to the spaces where the glow of a smartphone screen casts long, terrifying shadows. In our modern age, the internet is a boundless frontier, a place for connection, for art, for finding out who we really are. But flip that mirror around, and you will find a hunting ground, a place where identities are stolen, where obsessive vanity breeds unspeakable cruelty, and where the people you trust the most can lure you into the dark. Tonight, we are looking at 3 distinct threads of the digital web. 3 stories where the screen did not protect the victims but instead became the very instrument of their unraveling. Step away from the light. Settle into the quiet. Let's begin. Part I, the canvas in the cage. Cast your mind back to the sprawling, chaotic landscape of Instagram in 2017. If you fell down the right rabbit hole, scrolling deep into the nocturnal hours, you might have been confronted by a face that stopped your breath. It was a visage that defied human anatomy. The cheeks were violently sunken, carving deep chasms into a skeletal jawline. The skin held the pallor of a freshly exhumed corpse. The nose was dramatically, impossibly upturned, and sitting above it all were eyes, massive, hollow, and utterly unblinking, bulging from a fragile skull. This was the profile of Sahar Tabar. But behind that moniker was a 19-year-old Iranian girl named Fatima Kishviand. When Fatima first opened her account, her digital footprint was entirely ordinary. She posted what millions of teenagers post: soft-focus selfies, fashion experiments, the mundane beauty of youth. But slowly, the feed began to warp. It was a gradual descent into the uncanny valley. With every new upload, Fatima's features grew sharper, more distorted, more entirely alien. By the time winter rolled around, the bright-eyed teenager was gone, replaced by a haunting figure that looked entirely ripped from a Tim Burton nightmare. And that was precisely the point. Fatima idolized the macabre elegance of the corpse bride. She wanted to embody that gothic, tragic beauty. The rumors began to swirl immediately. Tabloids caught wind of the bizarre imagery and fanned the flames of a global spectacle. They claimed she had gone under the knife more than 50 times, carving away her humanity in a desperate bid for internet fame. The Western media eagerly crowned her the zombie Angelina Jolie. The moniker stuck like glue. It was a title that ignited morbid fascination across the globe, driving hundreds of thousands of digital voyeurs to her page. They came to gawk, to insult, to psychoanalyze. Her comment sections became a battleground of disgust and awe. To the world, she was a walking, breathing horror story. But the true horror had nothing to do with scalpels or silicone. The terrifying reality was that her grotesque appearance was an illusion. Fatima had not butchered her face. She was an artist, and the internet was her canvas. Using heavy prosthetics, theatrical makeup, extreme angles, and heavy digital manipulation, she had sculpted Sahar Tabar out of thin air. Tabar was merely a character, a phantom born of pixels and contouring. A creative outlet for a young woman trying to carve out a space for herself. And she succeeded brilliantly. Nearly 500,000 people followed her every move. But in drawing the eyes of the world, she inadvertently drew the eyes of the state. Iran's digital landscape is not a free frontier. It is an environment suffocated by tight observation and rigid moral policing. At that time, Instagram remained one of the final slivers of the internet where Iranian citizens could taste a fleeting sense of self-expression. But the authorities were watching. A young woman wielding immense influence, expressing herself through grotesque, anti-establishment imagery, was intolerable to the regime. On the 5th of October, 2019, the digital phantom vanished. Fatima's page was wiped from existence. The internet quickly learned the chilling reason why. Fatima had been dragged from her home in Tehran and thrown into a cell. The charges leveled against her read like a draconian manifesto: blasphemy, the instigation of violence, corrupting the youth, illegally acquiring income with her husband, and violating the strict national dress code. A judiciary official coldly stated to the press that her vulgarity was a direct assault on the moral fabric of the nation. She was not the only one. Within days, the authorities swept up 3 other prominent female influencers. They had committed no violence. They had sparked no riots. Their only crime was existing loudly on a screen. Then came the broadcast. On October 22nd, State-run television aired an interview that was meant to break her husband. Fatima was positioned before the cameras, her body draped in a dark veil, her face artificially blurred into a featureless smudge. The anchors did not introduce a young artist. They introduced a diseased mind. They labeled her a zombie afflicted by an abnormal psychological state. In a particularly cruel twist, they weaponized her family history, pointing to her parents' divorce as the root of her moral decay. Her voice trembled. Under unimaginable duress, Fatima was forced to recite a carefully scripted confession. She told the nation that the pursuit of likes had destroyed her soul. She begged for forgiveness. This public humiliation was a calculated theatrical display, a warning shot fired by the government to justify a looming total blackout of social media. By December 2020, the gavel fell. 10 years in prison. A decade locked away for editing photographs. While languishing in the overcrowded, unsanitary confines of the prison system, the invisible terror of the COVID-19 pandemic swept through the cell blocks. Fatima contracted the virus. Her condition deteriorated rapidly. She was brought to the very edge of death. Her legal team pleaded for temporary medical release, begging for basic human mercy. The state looked the other way. 14 agonizing months passed before the pressure finally caused the system to buckle. Half of her charges were quietly dismissed, and her sentence was commuted to bail. When she stepped out of the prison gates, she was hauled back in front of the state cameras. For the first time, her unedited, real face was broadcast to the nation. There were signs of minor cosmetic procedures, yes, but the ghoulish monster of the internet was nowhere to be seen. Standing there was just a young woman, exhausted and broken. She played the part she had to play to survive. She praised the mercy of the judge. She claimed that Sahatabar died in that prison, and only Fatima Kishviand remained. She vowed to disappear into a quiet, camera-free life. And she kept her word. Fatima vanished into the shadows, leaving millions to wonder, is she truly free? Or is she just living in a larger, invisible cell? Between 2011 and 2023, over 1,000 individuals in Iran were ripped from their homes for the crime of dancing online, or wearing the wrong clothes in a photograph. The internet looked at Fatima's pictures and saw a monster. But they were looking at the wrong thing. The true monster was a machine that could take a teenage girl, crush her identity, drag her to the brink of death, and force her to thank them for the privilege. Part II, the face of the huntress. Let's turn to a different kind of darkness. There is an old, deeply unsettling superstition that stretches back through centuries of folklore. The myth of the doppelganger. They say that somewhere out there, walking the earth, is a person who shares your exact face. The legends warn that to cross paths with your mirror image is the ultimate omen of doom. It means your time is up. It means your shadow has come to take your place. But we are rational people. We know that with 8 billion souls on the planet, genetic repetition is simply a mathematical certainty. You might look exactly like someone else, but it's just a coincidence. It's a fun party trick. It's a glitch in the matrix. What happens, though, when that coincidence becomes a weapon? What happens when your perfect match decides that the only way to escape her own life is to end yours? The 16th of August, 2022, Munich, Germany. Shahriban K., a 23-year-old beautician with a troubled, failing marriage, told her family she was heading out to meet her estranged husband. It was supposed to be a difficult conversation, an attempt to untangle the messy threads of their relationship. She climbed into her sleek black Mercedes and drove away. The sun dipped below the horizon, and Shahriban did not come back. The hours stretched into the agonizing silence of unanswered calls and unread texts. Panic set in. Her family, terrified that the volatile relationship had turned violent, mobilized. They drove frantically toward Ingolstadt, the Bavarian city where the meeting was supposed to take place. As they navigated the quiet, wooded stretches along the banks of the Danube River, their headlights washed over a chilling sight. There, parked at an awkward, haphazard angle against the tree line, was Shahriban's black Mercedes. The parents approached the vehicle, the crunch of the gravel under their feet loud in the dead of night. Then, they saw the stain. A thick, dark, viscous streak of blood smeared down the exterior of the passenger side door. Hearts hammering against their ribs, They peered through the glass. Slumped in the back seat, twisted at an unnatural, lifeless angle, was the body of a young woman. The police arrived swiftly, shattering the glass to pull the door open. The interior of the luxury car was a slaughterhouse. The victim had been subjected to a frenzy of violence, stabbed more than 50 times. The blade had focused with terrifying precision on the neck, the upper torso, and the face. The facial tissue had been utterly obliterated, carved up with a malice that suggested the killer wanted to erase the victim's very identity. The officers turned to Shahraban's weeping parents. They needed an identification, as impossible as it seemed. Through their tears, looking past the ruined face, the parents recognized the long, dark hair. They recognized the olive complexion. They recognized the clothes. It was their daughter. Shahraban was dead. The immediate suspect was the ex-husband. It made sense. A crime of passion. A final, brutal argument. But, as the detectives prepared to close the net, the coroner's office called. They had run the fingerprints. They had sequenced the DNA. The woman in the back of the Mercedes was not Shahraban. The victim was Khadija, a 23-year-old beauty blogger from the Heilbronn area, miles away from the crime scene. She had vanished on the exact same afternoon. When investigators pulled Khadija's photographs, a cold wave of realization washed over the precinct. Khadija and Shahraban were indistinguishable. They shared the same bone structure, the same cascading dark hair, the same makeup techniques, the same olive skin, the same age. They were identical. Within 48 hours, the truth inverted. Shahraban was not the victim of a brutal murder. She was the architect of one. She was spotted alive and well, casually ordering food at a local pizzeria. Police swiftly apprehended her, along with her Kosovan boyfriend, Shakir. When digital forensics tore into Shahraban's phone, they uncovered a plot so cold, so terrifyingly calculated, it defied belief. Shahraban's life was falling apart. Her marriage was toxic, her family was warring, and the walls were closing in. She wanted out. She wanted a blank slate, but simply running away wasn't enough. She needed the world to stop looking for her. She needed to die. So, she opened Instagram and began to hunt. She created dozens of phantom profiles. She scrolled relentlessly through the digital ether, searching hashtags, combing through beauty pages, looking for the one thing that could buy her freedom, her own face. She messaged the countless women who shared her features. Then, she found Khadija. Shahraban began the psychological trap. First, she posed as a male music executive, sliding into Khadija's direct messages to offer her a starring role in a high-profile rap video. She provided specific, believable details about a shoot. But Khadija was sharp. She reached out to the actual musical artist, verified it was a scam, and backed away. Shahraban did not give up. She shifted her persona. This time, she approached Khadija as a fellow beauty professional. She offered a simple, safe, mutually beneficial trade, a free, luxury cosmetic treatment in exchange for a shout-out on Khadija's popular page. It was a language Khadija understood. It felt safe. She agreed to meet. On that fatal August afternoon, Shahraban and Shakir drove to Epping. Khadija opened the door to the black Mercedes, expecting to meet a colleague, expecting a day of pampering. She slid into the passenger seat, completely unaware that she was looking into the eyes of her own executioner. They did not drive to a salon. They drove deep into a secluded, suffocating stretch of forest between Heilbronn and Ingolstadt. Once surrounded by the silence of the trees, the trap sprang shut. They struck Khadija over the head, incapacitating her, before unleashing the blade. 56 times. Shahraban ensured the face was mutilated beyond visual recognition, desperate to blur the lines between victim and killer. They left the body in the car, abandoned it by the river, and walked away, assuming they had committed the perfect crime. Shahraban assumed her husband would take the fall. She assumed Khadija was a ghost with no family to report her missing. And she assumed with stunning arrogance that the police would not bother to check the DNA of a faceless corpse in a registered car. The arrogance did not stop there. Chat logs revealed that prior to the murder, Shahraban had attempted to hire a hitman to execute her brother-in-law. She had even handed over 5,000 euros as a down payment. And while awaiting trial, Shakir tried to solicit an inmate to slaughter the key witnesses testifying against them. The trial was a marathon of horrors, stretching across 50 days of grueling testimony. The prosecutors painted the portrait of a predator, highlighting the messages where Shahraban coldly referred to Khadija as the ideal doppelganger. In January 2025, the gavel fell. Life behind bars for both of them, with a special classification of particular gravity, ensuring they will likely never see the outside of a cell again. It is difficult to wrap the mind around the absolute zero of that kind of malice. To sit in the dark, illuminated only by a screen, swiping through the smiling faces of innocent strangers, and thinking, yes, she can I my place. There are women walking the streets of Germany today, completely unaware that they were also in Shahraban's crushes. They are alive simply because they didn't reply to a message. A terrifying reminder that the faces we put on the internet can summon monsters we never knew existed. Part II, the last sleepover. For our final descent, we move away from the cold calculation of adults and into a territory that is somehow infinitely more disturbing. The violence of youth. There is a profound vulnerability in being a teenager who doesn't quite fit in. When you are soft-spoken in a loud world, the desire for acceptance can override every instinct of self-preservation. Amelia Weir was 14 years old. She was known to everyone around her as deeply empathetic, fiercely kind, and willing to give pieces of herself away just to make others smile. But that softness made her a target. Amelia had spent a portion of her young life navigating the turbulent halls of Sis as Lahurst, a Swedish foster care institution. It was a hard place, and Amelia bore the brunt of intense bullying. During her time there, she crossed paths with two other girls, 15-year-old Milak and 13-year-old Rafola. Their dynamic within the institution had been fraught, marked by the typical friction of displaced youths. But after their placements ended, a fragile connection remained. To Amelia, who had so few friends, Milak and Rafola represented a lifeline to a social world she desperately wanted to be part of. On July 22nd, 2024, the sun was shining down on Amelia as she shopped with her mother, Anna. They had just moved into a new home into lab 10 days prior. It was a fresh start. Then, her phone buzzed. It was Milak. She was calling to invite Amelia to a sleepover in Landskrona, a small, quiet town in southern Sweden. The party was being hosted by a girl Amelia had never met, but Milak pushed hard, promising that Rafola would be there too. Amelia hesitated. The journey to Landskrona was a daunting one for a 14-year-old. It required navigating a bus route and transferring between two different trains. She was nervous about getting lost in the unfamiliar transit system. But Milak was relentless. The phone calls kept coming. The pressure mounted, the urgency before the violence began. When the police kicked down the doors and dragged the teenage girls into the interrogation rooms, the initial facade of denial crumbled almost instantly. The truth they unveiled was sickening. There was no party. There was no other girl hosting a sleepover. It was an ambush. Milak had manipulated Amelia's youthful innocence, telling her that a boy she had a crush on was waiting to meet her near the secluded rail yard. As Amelia approached the dark, industrial stretch, Milak gave the signal. She coughed twice into the quiet air. From the shadows, Rafala emerged. She had constructed a crude, homemade mask to cover her face, but Amelia knew her instantly. Despite the mask, despite the eerie location, Amelia's first instinct was love. She smiled and stepped forward, throwing her arms open to hug Rafala. Rafala responded by driving her fist into Amelia's face. The 14-year-old collapsed to the gravel. Rafala straddled her, raining down blows. Together, the two teenagers produced the duct tape. They bound Amelia's thrashing limbs. They forced the tape over her mouth, silencing her screams. Then, they produced the hunting knife. They took turns, 32 times. The blade came down. Rafala would later coldly admit to delivering the strike that ended Amelia's life. Covered in the blood of their friend, they stood up, grabbed Amelia's packed overnight bag, the one holding the gift card meant for them, and walked away, tossing it into the dark waters of the sea. The next morning, acting out a bizarre, psychopathic pantomime, Rafala called Amelia's lifeless phone 12 times. At 7 in the morning, she typed out a text to the corpse. "Rest in peace, my sweetie. I love you. I'm so proud of you." In the interrogation room, the girls tried to weave a narrative of an accident. They claimed they only wanted to scare Amelia, and that the situation simply spiraled out of control. The digital footprint proved otherwise. Detectives discovered that mere hours before luring Amelia to her death, Milak and Rafala had sat together and watched a horrific snuff film depicting a throat being slit. They found security footage of the two girls earlier that afternoon, calmly walking through the aisles of a discount store, stealing the exact roll of silver duct tape and the hunting knife used in the slaughter. But why? What could possess two young girls to butcher a pair who only wanted to hug them? Internet sleuths theorized it was jealousy. Amelia had finally escaped the system. She was living happily with her mother, while they were left behind. But the official court documents revealed a motive so petty, it defies comprehension. Revenge. During their time in the foster home, Amelia had allegedly made a fleeting, offhand comment about Rafaela's brother. Rafala perceived it as a slight. She let that microscopic grievance fester, wrought in her mind until it demanded blood. When psychiatrists asked Rafala if she felt the crushing weight of remorse, she stared blankly and replied, "Sometimes I think I should think. But mostly I don't." Milak attempted to play the victim, claiming she was paralyzed by fear of Rafala and forced to participate. But her own text messages betrayed her, showing eager, conscious participation in the planning. Evaluation showed they had a dominant-submissive dynamic, but neither girl was found to be legally insane. They knew exactly what they were doing. In February 2025, the verdict was delivered. Guilty. But true justice was barred by the laws of the land. Because of Sweden's strict limitations on juvenile punishment, the sentences were agonizingly light. Milak was ordered to serve merely 2 years and 2 months in a closed youth facility. Rafala, the 13-year-old who delivered the killing blow and showed zero remorse, could not be criminally punished at all due to her age. The nation erupted in debate. The streets felt less safe knowing that the system could not properly address a crime of such staggering malice simply because the monsters had not yet celebrated their 16th birthdays. For Anna, Amelia's mother, the nightmare has no end. She was barred from viewing her daughter's body, the damage too severe for a mother's eyes. She spoke of her child as an angel, a girl who absorbed the pain of the world and offered only kindness in return. Maybe this world wasn't ready for her, Anna wept. As if the murder and the light sentences were not enough to break a mother's spirit, the dark underbelly of the internet had one final cruelty to inflict. When the video clips of Amelia's final, terrified moments, recorded by her killers, leaked online, anonymous trolls began to relentlessly spam Anna's inbox. They sent a grieving mother the footage of her daughter's slaughter, treating the ultimate tragedy as a sick, digital joke. This case shook the foundation of a country not just because of the blood, but because of the betrayal. This was not the work of a masked boogeyman hiding in the woods. It was the work of children. It was a violence orchestrated by the very people Amelia had packed a gift card for. What was supposed to be a beautiful milestone, a young girl's first slumber party, became an altar of betrayal in the dark. We build our lives online. We curate our faces, we search for connection, and we send our children out into the world hoping the people they meet on their screens are who they say they are who they say they are. But as the shadows lengthen and the screens go dark, we are reminded that the most terrifying monsters don't live in the movies. They are scrolling through the same feeds we are. They are waiting. Thank you for joining me in the dark tonight. Until next time. Keep your doors locked, and be careful who you trust on the other side of the glass. There is a specific kind of silence that blankets the residential neighborhoods of Japan. It is a silence built on a foundation of profound, deeply ingrained security. When we look at the statistics, Japan consistently ranks as one of the safest nations on the planet. To put it into perspective, the country's homicide rate hovers around a staggering 0.2 per 100,000 people. Compare that to the global average, which is exponentially higher, and you begin to understand the illusion of invulnerability that settles over the winding, narrow streets of the Japanese suburbs. Crime, especially violent crime, feels like a dark fairy tale from a distant land. It is an abstract concept. It is something that happens somewhere else to someone else. But this sense of absolute security is a fragile pane of glass, and when it shatters in the land of the rising sun, the violence that spills through is rarely ordinary. In a society where the social contract is woven so tightly, where homicides are exceptionally rare, the few individuals who do snap often do so with a terrifying, unfathomable brutality. It is as if years of quiet repression, societal pressure, and deep, unspoken desperation suddenly boil over into pure, concentrated malice. Today, we are going to step into the shadows of one of the most chilling, meticulously executed, and hauntingly unresolved mysteries in modern Japanese history. We are going back to 2004, to a quiet corner of Aichi Prefecture, to unravel a nightmare that left a nation utterly paralyzed. This is the story of the Kato family. We will retrace the timeline of their final days, map out the blood-soaked floor plan of their home, and stare into the abyss of the leading theories. Knock your doors. Settle into the quiet. Let's begin. The air was heavy, thick with the suffocating humidity of late summer. It was Tuesday, September 7th, 2004. A typhoon warning had just been broadcast across Aichi Prefecture, located in the central heart of Japan's main island. The skies were bruising, turning a deep, ominous purple as the atmospheric pressure dropped. Because of the impending storm, the local elementary schools had made the decision to send their students home early. For 8-year-old Shogo Kato, this was nothing short of a miracle. He wasn't complaining about the wind or the dark clouds. In fact, he was practically vibrating with excitement. In exactly 2 days, Shogo would be turning 9 years old. This sudden cancellation of classes felt like the universe was giving him an early birthday present, an afternoon of unexpected freedom. Shogo walked home through the hushed, winding streets of the Katsuyokai-ake neighborhood in Toyoke City. It was a peaceful area, characterized by a maze of narrow roads, detached residential buildings, and sprawling patches of farmland. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other, where doors were rarely locked, and where the most pressing concern was usually the weather. He approached his home, a modest but comfortable two-story detached house. This was the sanctuary he shared with his mother, Toshio, his father, Hiroto, his older brother Yuki, his older sister, Rina, and the newest, most beloved addition to the family, a spirited Shibuya-inu named Jackie. As Shogo approached the perimeter of his property, Jackie bounded up to greet him, tail wagging, a beacon of canine joy. But lately, the presence of the dog was more than just for companionship. Jackie had been brought into the fold to serve as a guard dog. A creeping, invisible dread had recently infected the Kato household. Over the past few months, the absolute safety of their quiet street had begun to rot from the inside out. Unsettling, inexplicable things had started happening. Unfamiliar, Suspicious-looking men had been spotted lingering near their property, watching the house with unblinking interest. Then the harassment escalated. Someone had managed to break into the family's car under the cover of darkness. A few days later, Rena walked outside to find that the tires on her bicycle had been deliberately, maliciously deflated. But the most terrifying incident had happened in broad daylight. Both of Shogo's parents had stepped out of the house, leaving the young boy home alone for a brief period. As Shogo sat in the quiet house, the front door now began to slowly, deliberately turn. Someone was trying to get inside. Shogo, summoning a surge of childish bravery, had marched to the entryway and shouted through the heavy door, demanding the intruder go away. The rattling stopped. Footsteps retreated. But the message was clear. They were being hunted. Now, as Shogo stood at the edge of his property, scratching Jackie behind the ears, his eyes caught something unnatural. Smeared vertically across the northeast corner of the concrete wall surrounding their home was a stark, jarring strip of pink paint. It was fresh graffiti. In the criminal underworld, such marks are often used by burglars or syndicates to target house, communicating its vulnerabilities to accomplices. It was a brand, a target. But Shogo was only 8 years old. The sinister implications of a pink streak of paint were no match for the all-consuming anticipation of birthday cake, wrapped presents, and colorful balloons. His mother, Toshio, baked him a special cake every single year, and the thought of it pushed the shadows from his mind. He brushed off the lingering unease, opened the gate, and ran inside to the warmth of his family. The typhoon battered the coast, a chaotic symphony of wind and rain. But by the evening of Wednesday, September 8th, the storm had completely exhausted itself. The skies over Toyoke City cleared, leaving behind a crisp, eerily still atmosphere. The street tilted in the Katsukai-Ake neighborhood was sparse, casting long, deep shadows, but the night was illuminated by a particularly bright, piercing moon. Visibility was exceptionally good. Inside the Kato residence, the atmosphere was light. Toshio, Shogo, Yuki, and Rena were gathered together, the soft glow of the television washing over them. They were spending the evening laughing, talking, and finalizing the intricate details for Shogo's birthday party the following day. It was a portrait of absolute domestic tranquility. The only absence was the patriarch of the family. Hiroto Kato was a municipal employee, a man tied to the grueling, relentless demands of Japan's corporate culture. He was currently stationed in the bustling city of Nagoya, roughly an hour's drive away, working overtime on a highly demanding, time-consuming project. Hiroto was known to work late into the night, sacrificing his evenings to climb the municipal ladder. Because of this, his chair in the living room sat empty. At around 9, Daroto pulled out his cell phone and sent a brief text message to his wife. He explained that the project was a nightmare, and he would have to work straight through the night. His justification was that by pulling this all-nighter, he would be able to secure the next day off entirely, dedicating himself completely to Shogo's 9th birthday celebration. 2 hours later, at exactly 11, Daro placed a phone call to the house. Toshio answered. The conversation was incredibly brief, devoid of any tension or alarm. It was a mundane exchange between a married couple. Hiroto simply called to remind Toshio to take a spare house key and hide it in their usual secret spot outside, so he wouldn't wake the family when he eventually returned in the early hours of the morning. Toshio agreed. They said their goodbyes. It was an unremarkable, completely forgettable phone call, except for the fact that it would be the very last time Hiroto Kato would ever hear the sound of his wife's voice. The family turned off the television. They brushed their teeth. They climbed into their respective beds. They closed their eyes, expecting to wake up to a day of celebration. The neighborhood of Katsukai-Ake was dead to the world. The silence of the early morning was absolute. But at approximately 4 p.m. on Thursday, September 9th, that silence was violently torn apart. Neighbors living adjacent to the Kato property were all to awake in their beds. Piercing through the thin walls of the suburban homes was the unmistakable, blood-curdling sound of a woman screaming in absolute terror. The voice belonged to Toshio. The raw panic in her cries was paralyzing. Almost immediately, the screaming was accompanied by a frantic, chaotic thudding. It sounded like multiple people sprinting heavily across the floorboards of the Cato house. A violent struggle was echoing into the night. And then, just as suddenly as the chaos had erupted, it ceased. The dreadful, heavy silence returned. The neighbors lay in their beds, hearts pounding, trying to rationalize what they had just heard. Was it a domestic dispute? A nightmare? But less than 30 minutes later, at roughly 4:25 am, a new sensory horror gripped the street. The sharp, acrid scent of thick black smoke began to seep through the window frames of the surrounding houses. People rushed outside into the cool night air. The Kaito residence was engulfed in a raging inferno. The flames licked the sky, roaring with a ferocious, unnatural intensity. Miles away in Nagoya, the phone on Hiroto Kaito's office desk began to ring. It was his brother, who lived in the same neighborhood as the family. The brother's voice was frantic, breathless. He ordered Hiroto to drop everything and come home immediately. The house was blazing, and Toshio, Yuki, Rina, and little Shogo were nowhere to be found. Hiroto slammed the phone down, sprinted to his car, and began the agonizing, a long doctor through the dark highways back to Toy Oak City. By the time his tire screeched to a halt near his property, the scene was apocalyptic. The heat radiating from his home was unbearable. Hiroto threw himself toward the blazing structure, screaming the names of his wife and children into the roaring flames, desperately trying to breach the walls of fire. But the heat was too intense. A team of firefighters physically restrained him, dragging the weeping father back from the brink. It took hours of relentless hosing before the sun began to rise and the fire was finally beaten back. The blaze had been so incredibly fierce, fueled by something chemical with her husband, that the heavy steel structural columns of the house had actually warped and bent under the intense thermal pressure. The fire was dead, but what the investigators found waiting for them inside the smoldering ruins was a vision of pure, unadulterated hell. The interior of the Kaito home was described by first responders as being as hot as a sauna. The walls were charred black, the air thick with the metallic stench of blood and the chemical bite of accelerant. The investigators donned their protective gear and began their slow, methodical walk through the carnage. The house was split across 2 levels. The ground floor was divided into 3 main sections, a kitchen accessible via an eastern side door, a traditional Japanese-style tatami room, and a Western-style living area. They entered the Western-style living room first. There, amidst the blackened debris, they found the youngest member of the family, 8-year-old Shoga. The boy who was supposed to be opening presents the next morning had been reduced to a horrific state. His small body was, in the grim terminology of the coroner, half cremated. He was smoldering, his features entirely unrecognizable, but the fire had not killed him. The autopsy would later reveal that the child had suffered a massive cerebral contusion. Someone had stood over the little boy and struck him a single, devastating blow to the head with a heavy, blunt metal object. The illusion of a tragic electrical fire instantly evaporated. This was an extermination. The detectives drew their flashlights and moved cautiously to the 2nd floor, their boots crunching on the charred stairs. They entered the bedroom of 15-year-old Yuki, the athletic, karate-loving older brother. Yuki lay dead on the floor. Like his little brother, he had been subjected to horrific blunt force trauma. A single, pulverizing strike to the skull had caused an acute subarachnoid hemorrhage, killing him instantly. But strangely, carefully draped over Yuki's lifeless body was a blanket. The killer had tucked him in. The brutality inflicted upon the male members of the household was shocking, but it was swift. When the investigators entered the bedrooms of the female victims, the narrative of the crime shifted from cold execution to deeply personal, frenzied sadism. Toshio and her daughter Rina were found lying outstretched in their respective rooms. They had not been bludgeoned. They had been butchered. Toshio's body bore the marks of absolute rage. She had been slashed and stabbed more than a dozen times, the blade tearing into her face and plunging deep into her back. Rina had suffered a nearly identical fate, stabbed roughly 10 times across her back and torso. The coroner's report on the stab wounds was chilling. The punctures were approximately 3 centimeters wide and drove incredibly deep, piercing all the way through their backs and into their lungs. The sheer physical force required to inflict these wounds was monstrous. The killer had struck with such unbridled aggression that the blade had snapped the women's ribs upon impact. Because investigators found no metallic chipping inside the wounds, they deduced that the weapon was an incredibly high-quality, hardened survival knife, featuring a blade roughly 20 centimeters in length. And just like Yuki, the mutilated bodies of Toshio and Drina had been carefully, deliberately covered with blankets. The crime scene was a labyrinth of contradictory, baffling psychological clues. Why were the men killed with a blunt instrument, while the women were subjected to a frenzied knife attack? The distinct choice of weapon strongly suggested the presence of multiple perpetrators working simultaneously, orchestrating the slaughter in tandem. Yet profiling experts could not entirely rule out the possibility of a highly trained, ambidextrous lone wolf carrying both a bludgeon and a blade. Why were Toshio, Rina, and Yuki covered with blankets as if to show a twisted sense of remorse, while little Shogo was left exposed to the flames? Why was Shogo found on the ground floor, when house rules strictly forbade the children from staying up late downstairs? Why was his body so much more severely burned than the others? The autopsy provided one of the most horrifying revelations of the entire investigation. Despite the neighbors hearing a violent commotion, none of the 4 victims possessed a single defensive wound on their arms or hands. The killer or killers had struck like phantoms. The family had been attacked while they were fast asleep. But the most nightmarish detail was found inside their ruined lungs. The forensic pathologist discovered varying quantities of dense black soot lining the respiratory tracts of Toshio, Yuki, Rina, and Shogo. They were bleeding out. Their skulls were fractured. Their ribs were broken. But they were not dead. As the killer walked through their home, splashing kerosene across the floors and striking a match, all 4 members of the Kato family were still taking shallow, agonizing breaths. They were burned alive. The detectives stood in the ruins, trying to trace the ghostly footsteps of the killers. But the sheer intensity of the fire had acted as the perfect bleach. The kerosene-soaked newspapers scattered throughout the house had successfully incinerated the vast majority of bloodstains, fingerprints, footprints, and stray hair follicles. The entry point was a riddle. Both the front and side doors of the ground floor were completely locked from the inside. There were no splintered frames, no shattered glass around the locks, no sign of forced entry. The intense heat had melted the ground floor windows, leading police to initially theorize the killers slipped in through a partially raised rear shutter. However, interviews with neighbors completely dismantled this theory. Toshio Kato was a protective, almost paranoid mother. Following the terrifying incident where a stranger rattled the doorknob, she obsessively locked every single entry point on the ground floor before bed. She would never have left a window open. Upstairs, the window in Yuki's bedroom was found wide open, but the ground below was soft, and there were absolutely no impressions to suggest a ladder had been placed against the siding. Then there was the timeline. The autopsy showed that little Shogo had the least amount of black soot in his lungs. Combined with his location on the ground floor, detectives deduced that he was the first to be attacked. The killer had indeed entered through the ground floor. Remember the secret spare key Hiroto asked Toshio to hide there? The detectives marched out to the storage shed. There, sitting in the exact spot Toshio had promised to leave it, was the key. If the killers had utilized this hidden key, they possessed a level of icy composure that bordered on the psychotic. They would have had to find the key, unlock the door, slaughter a family of 4, set the house ablaze, step back outside into the cool night air, lock the door behind them, and carefully place the key back into its hiding spot to entirely confuse the police, all within a matter of minutes. The initial theory of a botched robbery was immediately thrown out. This house, tucked away in a labyrinth of rural roads, was not selected by chance. The Katos were targeted by someone intimately familiar with the geography of Katsukai-ake, but the family had no known enemies. Furthermore, while the killers had opened a few drawers to simulate a burglary, they took absolutely nothing of value. The jewelry, the cash, the electronics, all untouched. In fact, only one single item was missing from the entire property: the dog's collar. Whoever orchestrated this massacre did not come for money. They came with a singular, blood-soaked objective: total annihilation. The perpetrators were ghosts. The luminol tests applied to the pavement outside the property glowed with 0 traces of blood. This meant the killers had arrived with a complete change of clothing, butchered the family, changed out of their blood-drenched garments, and tossed the evidence into the fire before vanishing into the night. They brought their own accelerant, They took the murder weapons with them. There was no CCTV. They were in doubt in less than half an hour. It was a masterclass in murder. Without a living witness, the trail was instantly freezing over. But there was a survivor. When the fire engines had arrived and the chaos was at its peak, responders found Jackie, the family's Shiba Inu, cowering in the shadows beneath a car parked in the driveway. The poor animal was shivering, traumatized, having undoubtedly witnessed the monsters who entered his home. One veteran detective, staring down at the terrified dog, muttered to a colleague dog, "I often seriously wonder how great it would be to be inside that dog's eyes and brain." Jackie could not speak, but his silence spoke volumes. The Cato family had specifically conditioned Jackie to act as an alarm system. Shiba-Inus are fiercely territorial, hyper-alert animals. Every single night, Jackie was chained by the front entrance. His job was to bark ferociously at any stranger who dared approach the property. On the night of September 9th, the neighbors did not hear a single bark, not a whine, not a growl. Yet, Jackie was found unchained. The killer had approached the dog, unbuckled his collar, and removed it from the property entirely. For a highly trained guard dog to allow a stranger to approach in the dead of night, touch its neck, and remove its collar without uttering a sound, one of two things must be true. The dog was paralyzed by an aura of unimaginable, dominating fear. Or the dog knew the person who unchained him. And with that chilling realization, the glowing, suspicious eye of the police department swiveled directly toward the weeping father, Hiroto Kato. To the outside world, Hiroto Kato was the quintessential Japanese sailorman, a dedicated municipal employee, a loving husband, a father sacrificing his nights to provide for his family. But as detectives began to peel back the layers of his life, a vastly different, much darker portrait emerged. Hiroto was living a vibrant, expensive double life. The grueling overtime that kept him away from his wife and children was largely a fabrication. When the clock struck the end of the workday, Hiroto wasn't hunched over a desk. He was stepping into the neon-circled, intoxicating world of upscale hostess clubs. In these lavish, dimly lit establishments, men pay exorbitant sums of money for the attention, conversation, and flirtation of beautiful women. Hiroto was not just a casual patron. He was an addict. He was spending tens of thousands of yen a night, showering his favorite hostesses with lavish gifts. He would later confess to investigators that he had developed a desperate obsession with escaping his mundane, suburban existence, seeking refuge in a glamorous, artificial world that Toshio could never provide. The obsession had a focal point. Rumors swirled through the investigation that Hiroto had become deeply, dangerously infatuated with a young Filipina hostess. The financial hemorrhage was staggering. Sources close to the investigation claimed Hiroto was funneling up to 400,000 yen, thousands of dollars, every single month to this one woman. He was allegedly plotting to divorce Toshio, abandon his children, and start a new life with his paid companion. In the hostess industry, a dynamic known as papakatsu, or sugar dating, is incredibly common. It is a transcational illusion of love. Whether this young woman truly cared for Hiroto or was simply draining his bank account is irrelevant. In Hiroto's mind, the romance was absolute reality. The financial and emotional toll on his marriage had reached a breaking point. Toshio had secretly confided in close friends about the agonizing distance between her and her husband. The bank accounts were mysteriously empty. His relationship with his teenage children, Yuki and Drina, had completely disintegrated into cold, awkward silence. Hiroto was a ghost in his own home long before the fire. The police had motive. Now, they needed opportunity. Just 20 minutes before Toshio's terrifying screams ripped through the neighborhood, at exactly 3:40 am, a commercial truck driver reported seeing a suspicious blue passenger vehicle idling roughly 200 meters from the Kato property. What caught the driver's eye was the license plate. It was an Owuor Ikamaki plate. This specific regional registration was not native to Toyoku City. It was, however, the exact jurisdiction where Hiroto's Nagoya office was located. Seeing an out-of-town plate lurking in the dark, rural suburbs at 3:00 in the morning was a massive red flag. Furthermore, while the firefighters were battling the blaze, Multiple responders witnessed a green vehicle with the very same O or Ikomaki plate slowly cruising past the burning house. Behind the wheel sat a man in his 30s or 40s. Was Hiroto Kaito watching his family burn? Despite the tantalizing circumstantial evidence, the timeline simply refused to break. Hiroto possessed an ironclad alibi. First, his personal vehicle did not have O or Ikomaki plates. Second, one of his municipal co-workers went on record, officially confirming to the police that Hiroto was in fact sitting at his desk in the Nagoya office at the exact moment the murders occurred. Could the co-worker have been lying? Could they have both been sitting in a hostess club, covering for each other? It's a plausible theory, but the physical evidence remained undeniable. When Hiroto's brother called to report the fire, he dialed the Nagoya office landline, and Hiroto picked up. He was an hour away when the flames ignited. Hiroto was never officially charged with the annihilation of his family, but his collision with the law was far from over. 1 year later, in 2005, the police kicked down Hiroto's door and placed him in handcuffs. He was charged with massive corporate fraud and embezzlement. Desperate to maintain the affection of his Filipina mistress, Hiroto had stolen over 10 million yen from his employers. Standing before a judge, the former family man pleaded guilty. His only defense was a pathetic whisper, "I am a weak man." He received a suspended sentence. The leniency of the court was shocking, but it stemmed from a deeply controversial claim made by Hiroto's defense team. They alleged that during his interrogation for the embezzlement charges, the detectives had brutally psychologically tortured him. They accused the police of using the fraud charge as leverage, relentlessly screaming at him, trying to force a confession for the slaughter of his family. The pressure was allegedly so severe that Hiroto snapped, grabbed a ballpoint pen from the interrogation table, and began frantically stabbing himself in the thigh until he bled. Since walking out of that courtroom, Hiroto Kaito has vanished from public view. He does not grant interviews. He does not speak to the press. But most damning of all, in the eyes of the public, he completely abandoned the memory of his family. Aside from the initial funeral in 2004, Hiroto has refused to attend a single memorial service. When the surviving relatives gather to hand out flyers and beg the public for information, Hiroto is nowhere to be found. Investigative journalist Miki Kato, who shares the surname but has no relation to the family, managed to track Hiroto down to ask why he refuses to seek justice for his murdered children. His response was chillingly cold. "No matter what I do, I'll still be seen as a suspect," he told her. "It's the police's job to solve cases. I don't want to cooperate with the police. I don't want to have anything to do with them again. I want to be left alone. I'm scared of the media, and I'm scared of you coming here or her husband. No matter how reasonable the arguments you make, I have no intention of cooperating. I don't care what people out there who don't know me think. I just want those who know me to believe me." With the father entirely uncooperative, the investigation began to rot, until a whisper from the criminal underworld changed everything. 2 years had passed since the ashes cooled in Katsuyokai. Inside the stark, fluorescent-lit walls of the Aichi police headquarters, detectives were interrogating a man regarding an entirely unrelated, minor offense. In the official case files, this man is referred to simply as T. Sitting across from the detectives, T suddenly leaned forward and changed the subject. "I know who the perpetrators of the Toyo case are," he stated. The room went dead silent. To test his credibility, detectives tossed a massive stack of photographs onto the table. Dozens of random women. Without hesitation, T reached into the pile and pulled out two specific photos. One was Toshio Kaito. The other was Hiroto's Filipina mistress. T had absolutely no documented connection to either woman, yet he identified them perfectly. T's story was a descent into organized crime. He claimed that the massacre was a contracted hit, orchestrated by 4 or 5 individuals comprised of hardened Yakuza members and foreign nationals. He explicitly detailed how the syndicate had managed to forge a duplicate key to the Kaito residence. He even claimed that he had personally accompanied the assassins to the property days prior to the murder to test if the counterfeit key turned the lock. To prove his presence, T grabbed a pen and sketched a perfectly accurate, highly detailed map of the Kaito property and the surrounding streets. The Special Investigation Headquarters was electrified. For months, They poured vast resources into verifying T's explosive claims. It was the break they had been praying for. But the criminal underworld is built on deception. Under the crushing pressure of repeated interrogations, T's narrative began to fracture. He started altering minor details, twisting his story in real time, seemingly trying to feed the detectives whatever narrative he thought would secure him a lighter sentence for his own crimes. Eventually, the brass made the agonizing decision to officially rule his testimony unreliable. The Yakuza theory was thrown in the trash. The faction of detectives who believed the killer was a lone, psychotic intruder smugly dismissed T as a con artist. But journalist Miki Kato was not convinced. She believed T had cracked the door to the truth, even if he eventually slammed it shut. Years later, in 2024, she published a terrifying anecdote. She had managed to secure a clandestine phone call with a retired detective from the 1st Investigation Division, one of the men who had walked through the Kato house. Over the encrypted line, the former detective offered a cryptic, haunting statement. "I believe there was a reason this crime happened on September 9th. I can't say more than that." Before Mickey could press him on the significance of the date, the detective's voice dropped to a grave, urgent whisper. "Don't get carried away and dig too deep," he warned her. "You might get yourself killed." Click. The line went dead. The internet is a breeding ground for true crime theories, and the detective's warning threw gasoline on the fire. Why September 9th? Was it a deadline? A day of reckoning? The forums began connecting the dots back to Hiroto's double life. Did the municipal worker accrue massive gambling debts to the Yakuza at the hostess clubs? Did he cross the wrong gang member by pursuing a woman who belonged to the syndicate? Was Hiroto himself the intended target, and his overtime at the office inadvertently saved his life, leaving his family to face the wrath of the mob? Or, the darkest theory of all, did Hiroto, drained of his finances and desperate to start a new life with his mistress, take the embezzled millions and hire the Yakuza to wipe the slate clean? Because T's testimony was buried, these theories remain trapped in the realm of speculation. The Aichi police have officially pivoted their resources, stating they must prioritize active cases over cold ones. The Kato family murders have been functionally boxed up and shoved into the archives. 4 years, the skeletal, charred remains of the Kato house stood as a black monument to the slaughter. Detectives had fought to preserve the structure, praying that advancements in forensic technology might eventually pull a phantom strand of DNA from the soot. But time and the elements are unforgiving. Structural decay set in. Local teenagers, ignorant of the sacred, horrific ground they were trespassing upon, began breaking in to vandalize the ruins. Eventually, acknowledging defeat, the city ordered the bulldozers to move in. The house was demolished. The physical evidence is gone. The police have moved on. The father has disappeared into the shadows. But the victims are not forgotten. Toshio Kato's sister, a fierce, unbreakable woman who goes by the pseudonym Mummy Toshi, has refused to let the silence win. From the moment she learned of the slaughter, Mummy swore a blood oath to avenge her sister, her niece, and her nephews. She transformed her grief into a weapon. Mummy became a leading voice in Soren no Kai, a powerful advocacy organization founded by the families of murder victims. Through sheer, relentless determination, they lobbied the Japanese government and achieved the impossible. They successfully campaigned to completely abolish the statute of limitations for capital offenses. Because of Mummy's fight, the monsters who butchered her family can no longer hide behind the clock. If they are caught, even 50 years from now, they will hang. Every single year, on the bleak anniversary of September 9th, Mummy and the surviving extended family travel to the empty lot in Katsuokai. They stand on the street corner, clutching stacks of flyers, begging the passing cars for any fragment of memory that might blow the case wide open. They stand there to ensure the world remembers the 4 souls who were silenced in the dark. They remember Toshio, a woman who worked herself to the bone, juggling shifts at a local pizza shop and a racetrack just to keep the lights on. She was a mother who, despite the crushing financial anxiety and a phantom husband, never let her children see her sweat wet. She was gentle. She was deeply, profoundly kind. They remember Yuki, a 15-year-old leader. He was the captain of the track and field club, a disciplined student of karate. The pages of his memorial yearbook were filled with testaments to his motivation and magnetic personality. A mummy often thinks of Yuki and weeps. Yuki lived his 15 years on Earth, as if he were rushing through them all at once. She wrote, "There must have been so much he wanted to do, which is why I fear he can rest in peace. His soul must be wandering." Yuki's death sent shockwaves through the community. His karate instructor, known as M-sensei, was absolutely broken by the sheer, unfathomable violence inflicted upon his prize student. The realization that all the martial arts training in the world couldn't save a sleeping boy from a hammer in the dark nearly caused M-sensei to abandon his dojo forever. But he returned. Today, M-sensei dedicates his life to teaching women and children specialized, brutal self-defense. He trains them not for sport, but for survival, teaching them the split-second instincts required to break a grip, scream for their lives, and run from sudden, overwhelming evil. They remember Rina, the athletic, vibrant high school volleyball setter. She was a creator, spending her quiet hours playing the piano and crafting handmade accessories. She possessed her mother's nurturing heart, acting as a second mother to little Shogo. A mummy's greatest heartbreak is knowing Rina never got to experience the simple, beautiful pain of falling in love. Her death left such a profound crater in the life of her best friend that the young girl dedicated her entire life to becoming a trauma nurse, honoring Rina by pulling others back from the brink of death. And I remember little Shogo, the boy whose hero was Ultraman, a child with an iron-clad sense of justice. When the school dug up a time capsule buried before the murders, they found an illustration Shogo had painstakingly drawn. On the back, in his youthful scrawl, he declared his dream of growing up to become a police officer. Shogo's best friend went on to fulfill that exact dream, donning the uniform and patrolling the streets, often whispering to the sky that they would have made the perfect partners. For years, a mummy would visit the site on Shogo's birthday and leave a small carton of sweet juice on the ground. But time marches on, even for the dead room with her husband. When the calendar reached the year Shogo would have turned 20, the legal drinking age in Japan, a mummy stopped bringing juice. She began pouring him a cold beer. As for Jackie, the silent witness under the car, he was taken in by a mummy. The terrified Shiba Inu who failed to bark was given a second chance at a peaceful life. He lived out his remaining years surrounded by love and quiet, eventually passing away from old age in 2016. The people of Katsuyokai still walk past that empty lot. They remember the sound of the piano bleeding through the windows. They remember the dog barking in the yard. They remember the laughter of children. Now, there is only the wind, and a mummy, standing on the corner with her flyers, waiting for a ghost to confess. Hiroto has yet to join her. Thank you for walking into the dark with me tonight. Be safe out there. Keep your loved ones close, and I will see you all again very soon.